Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining ISE's panel discussion on Modi's midterm test, 5 Indian states go to the polls. This event aims to analyze the particularities and complexities of electoral politics in each of the 5 states alongside examining the prospects of the BJP and the main opposition parties. Today, we are delighted to have with us the following panelists: Professor Sanjay Kumar, co-director at the Center for the Study of Developing Societies, New Delhi, India; Professor Sudha Pai, former professor and pro-vice chancellor at JNU; Professor Gurpal Singh, emeritus professor of Sikh and Punjab studies at SOAS, University of London; Dr. Rahul Verma, fellow at Center for Policy Research, India. Today's session is moderated by Dr. Ronojoy Sen, senior research fellow and research lead for politics, society, and governance at the Institute of South Asian Studies, NUS. Before we proceed with the event, we would appreciate if the audience could switch off their microphones and videos throughout the session. The panelists are requested to keep their videos on. If you have any questions or feedback to share during the proceeding, please forward them via this chat and they will be consolidated for the panelists to respond during the Q&A session later. This panel discussion is being live streamed on the ISES Facebook page. I will now invite Dr. Ronojoy to make the introductory remarks and chair the discussion. Dr. Ronojoy, please.
Thank you, Kunthavi. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. And a warm welcome to today's panel discussion on the assembly elections in 5 states. It's an appropriate time for the discussion since the elections begin tomorrow and continue till March 7th, with the results out on March 10th. I won't take up much of your time, but just make a few general points before handing over the floor to the speakers. It's a truism that some elections are always on at India at any given moment. However, the upcoming state elections are noteworthy and interesting for a few reasons. One, the states going to elections, namely Goa, Manipur, Punjab, Uttarakhand, and Uttar Pradesh, represent a nice spread both geographically and in terms of size. 2, the elections are happening almost at the midway mark of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's second term, and the results could be seen as a gauge of his popularity. This has led some channels, television channels, and analysts to describe these elections as a semi-final before the general or national election in 2024. There are a few, including one of today's panelists, Professor Sanjay Kumar, who have disagreed with this kind of analysis, noting that the results will not be an indicator of what will unfold in 2024. One of the obvious reasons for this is that there is enough evidence to suggest that assembly elections usually play out quite differently from general elections. Besides, there is still some way to go before the general elections, and most states will in fact have elections closer to the election in 2024. 3, the upcoming polls will be the first major set of elections after the deadly second wave of the pandemic in India in 2021, which overwhelmed the healthcare system and caused a high number of deaths. Although states like West Bengal had polling even as the second wave was on, and it arguably had an impact on the big win of the Trinamool Congress there, as well as the results in the constituencies that had elections in the latter phases of the elections. This set of elections could provide an indicator of the impact of the government's handling of the pandemic and the human and economic distress that accompanied it. This will also be the first elections after the controversial farm laws in India were rolled back by the central government in the face of sustained protests by farmers. Indeed, Punjab and Western UP were 2 of the sites where the protests were most vociferous. Finally, whenever Uttar Pradesh goes to elections, it's a significant event by itself. With a population of over 200 million, indeed, if it were a country, it would be the 5th most populous in the world, and a state that sends as many as 80 members to Indian Parliament, UP's importance cannot be overestimated. Many of the themes of contemporary Indian politics, including caste equations, religious polarization, welfarism, and political defections, are and will be on display in Uttar Pradesh. Besides, the results will be a trial of strength for regional parties like the Samajwadi Party or the SP and the Bahujan Samaj Party or the BSP, as well as a test of popularity for Chief Minister Adityanath, who is seen by some as a possible successor to Prime Minister Modi. With that, I will hand over the floor to the speakers. I will introduce them since they are well known to most of you and you already have their bios. May I now invite Professor Sanjay Kumar to kick off the discussion by perhaps speaking a little bit first on the smaller states of Goa, Manipur, and Uttarakhand, where the BJP is the incumbent or at least part of the governing coalition. These states will also be a gauge of the strength of the much diminished Congress, as well as new entrants like the Aam Aadmi Party and Trinamool Congress to states like Goa. Over to you, Professor Kumar.
Thank you, Ronanjay. Ronanjay has already mentioned that I will be speaking mostly on the smaller states. 5 states goes to poll: UP, Punjab. The states which are least being discussed are Manipur, Uttarakhand, and Goa, and least discussed in the political circle because these are small states. They have very few. They send very few members to the Lok Sabha. If I want to just cite the number of assembly seats in these states, Manipur has 60 assembly seats, Goa has 40 assembly seats, and Uttarakhand has 70 assembly seats. And if you compare it with UP and Punjab, these are very, very small states. I think, but from analytical point of view, these states are equally important if we look at what is happening in UP or what is happening in Punjab. What is at stake in these three states? I think the stakes for BJP is very high in these 3 states, as the stakes are high in UP. There is a lot of focus on UP because of the size, but the stakes are very high in these 3 states as well. BJP is the ruling party in all the 3 states: Manipur, Goa, and Uttarakhand. And I would like to remind all the listeners that in the 2 states, Manipur and Goa, these are in both the states. In the last assembly election, which was held in 2017, BJP could not get a majority. It was not even the single largest party. Congress was the single largest party, but BJP managed to form the government with forming a post-poll alliances with other political parties. What has happened? But in Uttarakhand, BJP registered a massive victory. Uttarakhand has a history of very close elections for the first few elections, first 3-4 elections. But it was only in 2017 that BJP registered a massive victory, more than 50% vote and very large number of seats, because all earlier election, it used to be a very close fight between BJP and the Congress. What has changed between 2017 and 2022? I think I would start straight away by stating, because this is the one point on which everybody has an interest, which party is ahead and which party is trailing. In my opinion, in all the 3 states, BJP seems to be ahead over its rival. I'm saying BJP seems to be ahead over its rival. I'm not saying that BJP is winning elections in these 3 states. But do we conclude that BJP is ahead in these 3 states because there is a wind blowing in favor of BJP? No, I am not saying that there is a euphoria in favor of BJP. In all the 3 states, including UP, I'm not talking about UP, there is a disenchantment against BJP. BJP's people are not that happy about the BJP's government. There are questions are being raised about how the performance of BJP government. But you might wonder why still then BJP is ahead in the electoral race in all the states. I think the nature of contest has put BJP ahead of its rival in all the 3 states. Now I can go state by state. Look at Uttarakhand, a state where BJP registered a massive victory in 2017. It used to be, in Uttarakhand, if we look at the early elections, both the parties used to poll almost roughly about less than 35% vote. So BJP and Congress used to poll together less than 70% vote, or roughly about 70% vote. And 30% vote used to go to other parties. And other parties include smaller parties like BSP, Samajwadi Party, Uttarakhand Kranti Dal, and few other parties. What happened in 2017? BJP registered a massive victory. But if we look at how people have voted in elections in different elections in Uttarakhand, there is always a sense of people looking for a third alternative. And why I'm saying that, because if you put all the votes, Congress, BJP, you add the votes of Congress and BJP and look at the votes of the other, this is roughly about 30-35% in all the elections. In 2022, what is happening is that a new entrant is there in Uttarakhand politics, which is Aam Aadmi Party. And Aam Aadmi Party is contesting elections very, very seriously in Uttarakhand. I don't see a very bright prospects for Aam Aadmi Party in Uttarakhand, but I think they have sizable presence to corner, say, roughly about, say, 6, 7, 8% vote. And this would be enough to damage the prospects of Congress in Uttarakhand. If Uttarakhand had witnessed a bipolar contest between Congress and BJP, like in the past, I think this election would have simply gone or confidently gone in favor of Congress. But the presence of Aam Aadmi Party in electoral contest in Uttarakhand has poised the election in a very tight, now it is again a very tight contest, because Aam Aadmi Party is eating into the support base of Congress. All those voters who are disenchanted with BJP, they would have all, or a large number of them would have voted for Congress if Aam Aadmi Party was not in the contest. But since there has been a desire among the people of Uttarakhand for a third alternative, there are sizable number of them. And when I say sizable number, my own sense is that they would get less than 10% vote, maybe about 6-7% vote. But that's going to be enough to damage the electoral prospects of Congress in Uttarakhand. So Uttarakhand is witnessing a very tight contest between Congress and BJP. In spite of BJP replacing 3 chief ministers during last 1.5 years, that has not gone well among the people of Uttarakhand. But in spite of that, BJP seems to be slightly ahead of Congress in a very, very tightly contested elections in Uttarakhand. Moving on from Uttarakhand to Goa. What is happening in Goa? Last assembly election, BJP had more votes, less seats, 13 seats. Congress had less vote. BJP polled roughly about 32-33% votes in Goa, but they ended up getting 13 seats. Congress polled 28% vote. They ended up getting 17 seats. But in spite of that, BJP managed to form the government. And what has happened during last 5 years, that the Congress, the shape of the Congress is no more the Congress which was there in 2017. Out of the 17 MLAs, they are left with only 3 sitting MLAs, and 14 of them have shifted to other parties. Large number of them have shifted to BJP, some to Trinamool Congress, and some to other parties. So Congress is not in the shape as it used to be it was in 2017 elections. So even though BJP is in power in the state for last 10 years in Goa, there is some anti-incumbency against BJP. There have been some issues with regard to distribution of tickets in BJP in Goa. People have, BJP members have not been given tickets, so they are contesting elections independently. All this will damage BJP's prospects. But still BJP is the front runner because of the nature of contest. It is a multi-corner contest in Goa. Trinamool Congress is a new entrant in Goa. Also, Aam Aadmi Party is contesting elections in Goa. So it is a serious 4-cornered contest. Aam Aadmi Party is much stronger in Goa compared to their electoral position in Uttarakhand. Trinamool Congress is also working very hard in Goa. So what will happen is that anti-BJP vote is again getting split between Trinamool Congress, Aam Aadmi Party, and Congress. So by default, BJP again seems to be ahead in the electoral race. I see Goa heading for a hung assembly. No party may be able to get a majority. That's my reading about Goa. But also remember that these are all states where the victory margin are very small. These are small states. If we look at Manipur, I will move on to Manipur later on, but just to give you an example, Manipur has only 21 lakh voters all over the state. And the constituency where tomorrow I am going to vote, that constituency itself has 12 lakh voters, 11 lakh voters, which is Saibabad in UP. So look at the size. So if the constituencies are of small size both in terms of geographical size and also in terms of number of voters. So the victory and defeat are decided, the win and loss is decided by very small margin. So Goa is heading for a hung assembly. In my opinion, BJP seems to be ahead because of the division of anti-BJP votes. Moving on to Manipur. In Manipur, last time when BJP could not get a majority, BJP managed to form the government in alliance with a National People's Front, National People's Party, and Nagaland People Front. So this is the government BJP managed to form in Manipur. But what has happened over the last 5 years, that now BJP is contesting elections alone in Manipur. BJP has lost its allies, but still it is a tight contest again, I would say, in Manipur. And it has developed into a multi-cornered contest because a new political party has also come up. There's a new party which is contesting in about 10-12 seats, which is the Kuki party. Kuki tribal community, they used to vote in very large number for Congress earlier. Now, since this party has come up, so they are going to split or eat into Congress support base. If that has not happened, if Kuki's party has not come up, Kukis would have voted in all likelihood for Congress, and that would have made Congress position much stronger compared to how it looks like at this moment. So in Manipur also, what is happening is a tight contest, but because the anti-BJP votes is again getting split between the Congress has managed to form a good alliance. It has an alliance with CPI, CPM, RSP, JDS. In terms of numbers, it may look like a very good alliance because there are a large number of political parties aligned with Congress. But since there is a new party, Kuki party, that is going to damage the electoral prospects of Congress in Manipur, like Aam Aadmi Party is damaging the electoral prospects of Congress in Uttarakhand. So overall, the sense in the three states is that BJP is facing anti-incumbency, but not as strong as, not to the extent of BJP getting defeated in these three states. There is a clear sign of disenchantment against the BJP government in all the three states, no doubt about that. BJP has lost. There is not only a disenchantment among the common voter, there is also a disenchantment if we look at from the political party's point of view. Not only in UP, BJP lost its allies, even in Manipur, Goa, they have lost their own allies. But losing allies is not only a loss for BJP because some people have also shifted towards BJP. So it makes up for some of the losses BJP has suffered in these three states. But clearly a sign that the allies are not showing same degree of trust in BJP as they have showed in 2017. People of these states, voters of these states are not showing same degree of trust or faith in BJP as they showed in 2017. There is a possibility of BJP's vote share going down in most of these states, but still BJP gets the benefit of doubt, or BJP seems to be ahead in all the three states because of the division of anti-BJP votes. So BJP would be the beneficiary of a split of anti-BJP votes in all the three states. I think I will stop here and maybe give my reflections on UP and specific questions about UP and Punjab.
Thank you, Professor Kumar, for that excellent overview of the three smaller states. And of course, we'll come back to you on UP and Punjab. I know you've been traveling there. I've been sort of privy to that through your Twitter posts and your recent articles that you've been traveling fairly extensively, and we'll be looking forward to some of your insights from on the ground, literally. So next we turn to Professor Sudha Pai to provide an overview of Uttar Pradesh politics, and particularly how things have changed in the past 5 years under the BJP and Chief Minister Adityanath. Please, Professor Pai.
Thank you. I'm audible?
You're audible, yeah. Please go ahead.
Well, I will first of all provide a context in which the election is taking place. That is, as you said, what is it that has changed? I think if we begin with the economy, UP's per capita income was barely half of India's average in 2019-20. In per capita income, UP ranks 32 out of 36 states and union territories. If you look at the gross domestic product growth in India, it was obviously falling even before the pandemic, and UP is no exception. But still, the UP government in late December 2021 put out expensive front page advertisements in leading newspapers that per capita income in UP has doubled in the 4 years of the BJP government. Advertisements also appeared claiming 4 lakh jobs since 2017. If you look at the official estimates, gross state domestic product of UP, that is GSDP, grew at a compound rate of only 1.95 per annum over 2017 to 21. In contrast, the growth rate was 6.92% during the Akhilesh period of 2012-17. Falling growth rate under the Adityanath government has meant that per capita income in UP has increased by nearly 0.43% on average over 4 years. And so the performance of UP is worse under the BJP regime in the last 5 years, despite the so-called double engine of Modi and Adityanath. As against this, we have in the 2000s, we have rising aspirations among the poor and the disadvantaged groups, including the lower OBC, the smaller Dalits, who disappointed with the BSP, the Bahujan Samaj Party and the Samajwadi Party have been attracted towards the BJP with Modi's promises of economic development and cultural inclusion since 2014. One other aspect is that there has been marginalization of the Social Justice Party, the SP and the BSP. As I've already said, people are disappointed with them. It's also because identity politics, which was dropping in, which was waning in the early 2000s, is today really not very important at all. And material advancement seems to be very, very important. So the question here is, will people vote according to their economic interests, or are they going to be swayed by the rhetoric that we are seeing daily, if you visit the field or on your television screens as such? There are other aspects, I will come to them as I go along, which have changed. Despite the declining economy and the declining image of the Adityanath government, to which I will come a little later, we find that the main battle in UP is not about economic or material advancement, but is between Hindutva and social justice. That is, the use of hardline Hindutva to maintain the Hindu vote bank, including the lower castes, and to divert attention from the declining economy. So it's a bipolar election today between the BJP and the SP. Also, it's an election where not only are there media reports, but it's now obvious in the behavior of BJP politicians as well, of uneasiness and desperation within the BJP. I'll take up a few major issues which are important in this campaign and how parties are dealing with them in order to show how the whole thing is unfolding and what is actually happening in BJP. A major issue which was mentioned earlier is the farmers' protest led by the Sanyukt Kisan Morcha. It's important not because the farmers are still angry despite the repeal, but the impact it's had on Western UP, which that is, it's virtually made Western UP the major theatre of the battle. So the key question is, will there be consolidation of the Jats and Muslims in the Baghpat, Shamli, Muzaffarnagar area, where there are hardly any Yadavs, but many Jats and Muslims? Field reports of the SP-RLD coalition being well received are there, and two reasons are usually put forward. The Jain Chaudhary has worked hard during the protest and emerged as popular among the younger generation of Jats. The second is the Muslims moving towards the SP and accepting the candidates put up by the SP-RLD. In contrast to the unhappiness expressed by BJP workers, leaders over ticket distribution, there's been hardly any revolt over SP-RLD tickets announced. Some argue that even Dalits bothered by price rise and unemployment want the SP-RLD to win. But I think we must remember that the BJP has the urban vote in the region. Also, that farmers have repeatedly expressed their unhappiness against the BJP, whether it's 2019 or 2017, earlier 2017 elections. But they have voted for it despite the deepening agrarian crisis, despite demonetization. And the growing Jat Muslim unity, which is encouraged by the SP-RLD alliance, could lead to what is being called a reverse polarization by smaller Hindu castes like Chinese, Gujars, Lohars, etc., against the SP-RLD alliance. These communities were not active in the farmer protests. And there's a feeling among them that if the SP-RLD alliance were to win, the Jats would then come back in a very dominating position. And there is the feeling on the ground, irrespective of what has been happening about the farmers' protests, that only the BJP can protect them from the domination of the local Jats. So there is also the question that ultimately, will Jat farmers vote as Hindus based on their identity, or as farmers based on their occupational identity and needs? I think that is something that we need to see. It's an interesting issue which will come up in the election message. Second most troubling for the BJP are the cracks in the Hindu subaltern social coalition built in 2014. As we know, disgruntled OBC leaders like Swami Prasad Maurya, Dharam Singh Saini have both left, and others have left the SP and gone to the SP. If they have alleged that lower caste interests have been ignored, which might resonate with OBC voters. Akhilesh has tried to take, that is the SP leader, has tried to take advantage of this in two ways. One, by making alliances with small OBC Dalit parties, RLD, Suhel Dev Bharatiya Samaj Party, Mahandal, sections of the Apna Dal, and so on. And also by trying to homogenize and bring all these smaller, it's a very difficult thing to do, but and therefore emerge as the leader of the backwards or the pichde, as they are called. So, but at the same time, there have always been revolts where the BJP is concerned before an election because they change large number of delegates. So is this just a revolt by few people being denied tickets? Yet at the same time, Maurya has been the OBC face of the party, and his exit signals that not all is well within the BJP, the UP unit. But at the same time, despite the crowds at his Vijay Rath rally, Akhilesh Yadav has not put forward any, well, shall I say, overarching idea or any grand plan or anything to capture the imagination of the people. He's focused largely on making very specific promises: free electricity, the pre-2004 pension plan, and then yesterday I think they unrolled their manifesto, and there has been more of that as such. The third is the declining image of Adityanath due to poor governance. And as we all know, mismanagement of the second wave of COVID in March, April 2021, poor law and order, bad roads, high crime rate, rising atrocities against Dalits, sexual assaults of women, the Lakhimpur incident, and so on. There's also unease over the jailing of journalists for criticizing the government, excessive use of police force, killing of so-called Brahmin criminals, and so on and so forth. But equally, or maybe more important, are the differences among BJP leaders. In UP, over Adityanath's style of functioning, his inaccessibility, exclusion of the Brahmins from the state's governance, who feel that only Thakurs are being taken in. All of these became public when attempts were made by Modi Shah in mid-2021 to replace him or to make changes in his cabinet, which just didn't work out, partly because of support from the RSS, strong support. So a worried BJP has rallied around Adityanath in an effort to portray the united party and publicly called him a tough and capable administrator. But the differences have been merely papered over, and I don't think they have completely disappeared as such. When we look at the BSP campaign in comparison, despite facing an existential crisis, it's very lackluster. It's still using its old Sarvajan strategy. It has lost a substantial number of very trusted leaders who were groomed by Kanchiram. Either they could not work with Mayawati or were attracted by the strong BJP or SP. So there's been a certain following out of the party and a breakdown of the district organizational structures. Also, the campaign is very late. It's only on February 3rd that Mayawati did a major rally in Agra, where she stridently attacked the BJP and the SP. But Dalits are disappointed with her. Maybe the feeling largely is that it's the Chamar Jatavs who will remain with her, but the smaller Dalits would probably still remain with the BJP. The Congress party, through a series of well-attended rallies, promises of tickets to women, scooters to girls, jobs, Nyaya scheme, Priyanka Gandhi Vadra as its chief ministerial face, etc. There have been very good efforts to rebuild the party and has definitely improved its image. But it lacks organizational strength on the ground, and it seems to be aiming more at the 2024 elections as such. The BJP has used a rather heady mix of communal rhetoric, of highlighting of its achievements, whether they are true or not, and of deftly mixing this with promises of development and so on. Adityanath has used, communal rhetoric is occupying the center stage in UP. See, what is happening is that initially there is a talk of development, but as we move towards the elections, communal rhetoric takes over. Adityanath has used a lot of it, good examples being the terms Abbajan, Chachajan for Muslims and so on. We use, a warning against parties which use the term Jinnah, reference to the Congress having planted the seeds of terrorism in Kashmir and so on. The SP having used force against the Ram Janmabhoomi agitation and so on. And in a recent interview, Adityanath has asserted that he takes great pride in being a Rajput. And he listed his achievements, particularly that there have been no riots in this period, that action against mafias has been controlled, that there is great security to women, surprisingly, that there has been enhancement of employment opportunities and so on and so forth. And he has also focused on the free ration scheme and cash transfer to the poor. So welfare is also one of the factors which the BJP is hoping will enable it to overcome all the other weaknesses that may be there. The campaign was taken over by Amit Shah in late January. And as it's the SP, RLD and Western UP, which is so important, he began his campaign from Kairana in Western UP, where he tried to rouse old communal memories by talking about the Hindu exodus from Kairana, which was so important in the 2017 elections, which came soon after, and also the exodus which he claimed happened after 2013 Muzaffarnagar riots. He also reminded them of the pre-2017 era when SP was in power. So communal rhetoric in that sense has been increasing. Prime Minister Modi has inaugurated many new projects in UP, showcased new medical colleges, infrastructure. There's of course the Purvanchal Expressway, Vijayawada Airport and so on. And he's talked about the double engine state. But most important, I think, was Modi's speech on January 31st when he attacked the opposition by using specific communal remarks, which were noted by everyone. Also, his speech in Parliament on 7th February, that is just 2 days ago, he tried, in fact, to argue that the opposition was responsible for the spread of COVID. So he used Parliament, in fact, to make a political speech as such. There's also been the use of religiosity by Modi in his election campaign. And that, I think, marks the return from Vikas Purush back to Hriday Hindu Samrat, which actually points to the kind of desperation that the BJP is experiencing. Two highly publicized events were there, the laying of the foundation stone of the Ram Mandir and more recently the inauguration of the Kashi Vishwanath corridor. In both cases, the Prime Minister, dressed in saffron, took part in Hindu rituals that were conducted. And all BJP leaders, whether it's Shah, Adityanath or Keshav Maurya, pointed to the unresolved Krishna Janmasthan temple in Mathura, that such issues remain in the mind of the BJP. In conclusion, I would say that a twofold scenario seems to be visible. If the BJP comes back to power with a majority as in 2017, which I don't think is going to happen, but it could further upset internal equations. The failed attempt to replace Adityanath as Chief Minister has fueled the perception that Modi and Adityanath are in opposing camps, that Modi would benefit without Adityanath in power in UP in 2024, which has spread among the rank and file. Second, the BJP remains a formidable electoral force. And as I have written elsewhere, I think they will come back to power, but with a very reduced majority. Because the BJP this time is on the back foot due to the unrest among the farmers, the failing of the Adityanath government, divisions within the party, and the economic downturn, COVID, etc. If the opposition does manage to put up a fairly good performance in UP, it could encourage regional parties to come together for the larger battle in 2024. But at the same time, I would agree with Sanjay that retaining that UP is important in itself. And a negative mandate in UP would pose a danger to Narendra Modi's bid for a third term in 2024. Thank you. I'll answer questions later.
Thank you, Professor Pai, for unraveling some of the complexities of a state, which is, of course, legendary for its complexity and intricacies. May I now invite Professor Gurharpal Singh to speak on the state of play in Punjab, which has seen, of course, significant churn in the recent months, including the farmer protests, as well as the departure of Chief Minister Amrinder Singh from the incumbent Congress government and subsequently tying up with the BJP. There is also the prospect of a possible upswing in the fortunes of the Aam Aadmi Party in the state. Professor Singh, please, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm grateful for this invitation. I just want to say that in what I'm saying about Punjab, there are many similarities with the presentation given by Professor Sanjay Kumar on the small states, insofar as the ability of the dominant party to control the electoral competition in the small states, the importance of the third party effect, namely the ARP, and also the exception in Punjab, because in all other states, the BJP is strong. The BJP has a very small following in Punjab, and this makes it somewhat unusual compared to other states. I will go by a slide I presented, so I quickly go through some of these points. I've been looking at Punjab elections since 1985, and I think this election is probably the most extraordinary since the one held in 1992 at the height of the militancy under the army umbrella, which then led to the restoration of normalcy and peace in Punjab after almost a decade of militancy. The election might see the end of what as political scientists have called, with reference to Punjab, who specialize in Punjab, is a 2.5-party system that's operated in Punjab since 1967, namely the competition between Congress on one hand, and then Akali Dal and the BJP on the other. Punjab is a small state, like the small states that we've discussed before, but it does have regional and national implications insofar as the anti-incumbency wave might, anti-incumbency in the sense a protest vote against the BJP, i.e. for Congress or other parties, might suggest that there is something of a wave emerging. To start with, I just want to refresh people's memories of what happened in 2017 when we had a Congress landslide and the decimation of the Akali Dal BJP coalition and the rise of the ARP. The ARP is here represented on the map in pink. The ARP made a significant breakthrough in the Malwa region. Punjab has 3 electoral areas or regions, roughly separated by a map halfway across by the river Satluj and the river Ravi. So it has the area below is the Magyar, the area bordering the area below Satluj is the Malwa, my mistake, and the area bordering Pakistan is the Majah, and the central district is the Doaba district. It is the Malwa region which controls nearly 67 seats, which is the key battleground. So, although in 2017 Congress won a landslide of seats, it was a very narrow competition. The winning margin in 21 of the seats was less than 4,000, and in 12 seats it was less than 2,000. And it's important to bear this in mind, that given the close contest, the third party effect or fourth party effect can be quite large, and i.e. that it can deliver a large number of seats for a party that can hold its core constituency. One of the things to remember for going forward in this election is the size of the scheduled caste population in Punjab, which is one of the highest in states in India. It's at 32%, and 34 seats in Punjab are scheduled caste seats, which can influence up to 40 to 45 seats overall. But despite this emphasis on this dimension, my own view is that the nature of caste and caste differences in Punjab is overemphasized, and that the scheduled caste population is not homogeneous, and it's a mistake to read caste in Punjab in terms of other states, for example, UP. And although the OBC and scheduled caste population comprises about 2/3 of the population in the state, there's a great deal of fluidity in its voting and relationship with the upper castes. Since 2017, I think we need to, while the 2017 saw a significant decline in the Akali Dal and BJP vote and the rise of the third party up, things have changed somewhat since then. In the 2019 elections, these parties, in percentage terms, recovered, staged something of a recovery. And although Congress held its vote, it didn't increase its representation, and Congress was able to return 8 MPs to the Lok Sabha, and the strength of the Congress at the time suggested that it was holding out against the Modi wave, which was prevalent in the Lok Sabha throughout northwest India. What are the key issues in this election? Well, essentially, the key issues revolve around poor governance and the Congress's record. The Congress since 2017 has been in a sorry state. It had a huge victory and promised to sort out the ills and misdeeds of the previous government, the Akali Dal, over corruption, over religious issues relating to sacrilege cases during the Akali Dal BJP government, prevalence of drugs, and probably most importantly of all was to put the economy on a sound footing. The Akalis left with a debt of nearly 2 lakh crores, the state debt, and without any funds to pay their employees, and the state was effectively running a fiscal deficit of unmanageable proportions. Since then, however, the Congress has not made much of the affairs and in fact has added to the debt and increased it by 1/3 to almost 3 lakh crores. There are many kind of political developments that have happened since 2017, which I don't have time to go into. Suffice to say that since 2019, the Congress in Punjab has been on the back foot, mainly because of its inability to deliver its development agenda and internal fighting within the party between the Chief Minister, Captain Amrinder Singh and Sidhu, which then culminated recently in the ditching of Captain Amrinder Singh and the election of Charanjit Chani as the Chief Minister, who has gone in as the Congress's face in the elections. Perhaps overshadowing all this has been the farmers' agitation in the last year and a half, which has affected all political formations in one way or another. Certainly, it has affected the way the political parties are now gearing up to present their programs vis-a-vis the elections which are coming up. And I will talk a little about that in a minute. But I just want to highlight that given what has happened, all political parties, including the BJP, which issued its manifesto yesterday, are promising huge goodies to the electorate and waivers, loan waivers, and income to people which are really untenable given the state of Punjab's perilous economy. But nonetheless, this is politics today, and this is how it's operating. Going quickly on to the state of the political parties in Punjab before now facing us in the elections, the Congress has a new leadership, but it's beset by internal divisions. It has a poor governing record. Whether the new chief minister will enable the Dalit vote to be consolidated remains to be seen. I think this is an effort to arrest the strong anti-incumbency effect which is going to buffet the Congress in the elections. But the favorable win for Congress, however, is the other parties are also not as united as they normally are in the cycles that have election cycles that have predated 2017. Its chief opponent, the Akali Dal, Shromani Akali Dal, remains quite weak and has not recovered sufficiently from its damage that it accrued in 2017 elections. It is aligned with the BSP and some BJP dissidents, but I think it will struggle to increase its vote beyond 30%. It got 27% of the vote share in the Lok Sabha elections in 2019, and it's been on the wrong side of the farmers' agitation. So I'm not sure it will be able to capture the anti-incumbency effect. The main party which is gaining from the weakness of the Shromani Akali Dal and the Congress is AAP. The AAP emerged as the main opposition party in 2017, but it subsequently has been set by internal factionism and divisions. But within the media and the press and the poll forecasts, it is suggested that the main competitor to the Congress is AAP, and its populism offering income of 1,000 rupees per month to every female over the age of 18 seems to be very popular, as well as other popular promises. The BJP overall is on the back foot. It is still suffering hugely from the farmers' agitation. However, being a national party, the governing party, it has been able to rope in the new party set up by Captain Narendra Singh and the breakaway Akali Dal S. The fifth element confusing the electoral competition are the farmers' unions, which are also contesting. They may or may not be effective, but they certainly will act as spoilers in the overall competition and the outcome of the results. What is the result? What are the likely outcomes? Well, I think essentially the result will be determined by the party which keeps its core votes together. And the high level of competition, I think, will lead to the fractionalization of the votes, especially among the Jatsik peasantry and the scheduled castes. The scenario, as I see it, is an effort by the old political formations, the Congress, to consolidate its vote and the scheduled caste vote on the one hand, and the Shromni Akali Dal and the BJP and its alliances to consolidate their vote banks, faced with what looks like, and this may be or may not be real, an up wave. Poll forecasts are all over the place, as they normally usually are, with some indicating a victory for ARP, others indicating a strong performance by the Congress. Nowhere in the picture is the Shromni Akali Dal and the BJP. My own view is that I think the Congress will emerge as the largest, biggest party, not because of what's happened and the change of leadership, but largely because of the high level of competition and multi-cornered contests among its opponents and their ability to not come together. And the role of ARP as a third party spoiler. So possible outcomes are a Congress victory or as a biggest party, or ARP as the biggest party and probably supported by Congress. And I think there is a kind of fault line between the parties which have traditionally aligned with the BJP, the Shromni Akali Dal, BSP to some extent, and the breakaway parties. But this election is probably the most difficult to predict. In the last 20 years, I think my own view is that I think Congress will emerge as the largest party, but we wait and see. What are some preliminary observations? Well, I think we'll have a hung legislative assembly, and this will probably suit the BJP best because it can then influence events in Punjab through executive control and proxies. A Congress victory, on the other hand, might be the beginning of a wave, both in Himachal Pradesh, Haryana, perhaps even Delhi and UP to some extent. Is there likely to be a dramatic realignment of Punjab politics? As some commentators are speaking, I doubt it. I think this won't happen unless there's an outright victory by ARP or by Congress, which marginalizes internal dissent. The loss of power by Congress of the Shromni Akali Dal, I think, will be quite serious for the Sikh political elites, and they will have to rethink how they're going to engage in the politics of the state, where if that does happen, there is clearly a Dalit and scheduled caste assertion. Finally, I think if we do have a hung verdict, then we have the prospects of a highly interventionist centre, and the problems of the Punjab economy largely still unresolved, in the background of the farmers' agitation. And I think this overall provides a very dangerous mix for revival of identity politics. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Singh, for an analysis of the state of play in Punjab, and also looking ahead to the election outcome. Finally, it gives me great pleasure to turn to Dr. Rahul Verma to shed light on what he thinks is likely to be a bipolar contest between the BJP and the Samajwadi Party in Uttar Pradesh, and to analyze the contours of that contest. May I also request you to send in your questions in the chat box for the discussion session, which will immediately follow Dr. Verma's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Rananjay, for inviting me, and ISS for having me here. It's a great privilege and honor to be speaking on the same panel as my mentors, Sanjay Kumar, Sudha Pai, and also first time I'm seeing Dr. Gurharpal Singh. So it's a great honor. Also, previous speakers before me have already laid foundations of this conversation in detail. So I'll be making much more general observations and then come to Rananjay, your question on what's happening in UP. First, I agree with Sanjay Kumar on this is not a semi-final election. Media tends to make all elections in semi-final, and anyone who follows any sport knows semi-final only guarantees victor that they can play in the final, nothing more. So if you win the World Cup semi-final, you can play in the final. It doesn't tell you anything more. Second, I think what he was saying about the three smaller states, which is BJP being ahead in those states, what he was actually referring to in some ways, and the way I read it, is basically not whether BJP is winning or not, but what is the emerging structure of competition in those states are. And emerging structure of competition basically places some parties on advantage and some parties on the back foot, right? So you will always keep seeing defections happening around elections, and you will keep seeing, for example, right now COVID restrictions have posed certain limitations on the rallies, and some parties having greater advantage because of their social media presence. But we know what happened a year ago in West Bengal. BJP had a higher social media and online infrastructure, and in fact, few months before West Bengal polls seen that like half of the Trinamool Congress has shifted towards the BJP. Yet Mamta not only won the 2020 election, but won with a greater margin. So defections are usual for elections. They don't tell you anything. Third, basically, if you think from the emerging structure of competition perspective, you know, among of these 5 states, Congress is opposition in 4 and BJP is incumbent in 4. And in some ways, if you think about the anti-incumbency and other stuff, Congress is well poised. This could be their best year since 2014. But we have also known that Congress basically has a habit of, you know, kicking in the foot. So the scores may not change. But thinking from this structure of emerging structure of competition, let's go to your question in UP. If you think about 2017 election, BJP had 300 plus seats and around 10 to 12 percentage point advantage over the nearest rival SP, right? So given all of this, a double-digit swing in Indian elections are hard. It's not impossible. SP can manage, but to do it again and again and to happen in the same state again and again is hard. And that's what basically puts BJP in a certain advantageous position. That does not mean that SP with a grand alliance which it has built on cannot take on BJP. Then there were basically some concerns, and Professor Pai in her eloquent speech also mentioned about whether voters are going to think about economy and economic concerns or identity issues are going to drive their voting choices. The way I look at it is, see, BJP's politics, especially after Prime Minister Narendra Modi, is basically built on 3 pillars. The first pillar is of Hindutva, ideological issues, which is laced with nationalism, right? So that's the first layer. What it does, it basically energizes the upper strata of society and BJP's core base. The second pillar of BJP's mobilization strategy is welfare or labharthis, as many have been pointing out. So massive infusion of welfare at the grassroots level, and also representation of lower caste within the party organization, ticket nominations to contest, and in cabinet. Remember, the latest Prime Minister Modi's expansion was completely focused on, we have included so many Dalits and so many OBCs in the cabinet. So that's basically how they are targeting the lower strata of the society. The third pillar of BJP's campaign, and especially in a state like UP, is built on the organizational resources, which is basically the kind of money and charismatic leadership they can put to voter. And this organizational resource plus charismatic leadership, what it does for the BJP, when it helps them in crafting a narrative and then push that narrative in a high blitz campaign mode. And this three, in a way, the combination of these three, wherever is operating, gives BJP a very profound advantages. Now, can SP take on? Yes, sure. They have all the recipe that's available to them. They have got smaller players with them, but we don't know what the potential of these smaller players are, right? None of these players have basically performed alone. So we don't know how much Rajbhar Party or Nishad Party can actually mobilize. And given what happened in 2019, when you could have like the best formidable alliance combination, SP plus BSP plus RLD, BJP managed to even trounce that. So SP may have got the alliances right, but it's still missing a bigger message to sort of mobilize. Now, why do I think that UP elections are going to be bipolar? And I don't think there is any two thoughts about it. There are differences in the matter of degree. UP is, given the nature of the campaign, what's happening, it is likely to reflect what happened in West Bengal, right? In West Bengal, the competition got restricted between the TMC and the BJP. And the third and fourth player, like the CPM, which had a strong ground machinery, or Congress, which had strong pockets of influence, they all were demolished in that bipolar competition. So yes, Congress under Priyanka Gandhi, which seems to be making right noises, or BSP, which seems to have a formidable base among Dalits, it's not that they are not going to get any votes like or win seats, but I think even if they manage a sizable section of votes, the chances of them being able to convert into seats would be really, really hard. So what you might end up seeing, that the SP plus BJP alliance combined will be winning somewhere around 90% of seats and 75 to 80% of votes. So it will be largely a bipolar competition. And in bipolar competition, basically the ideological platforms, your ability to build a larger social coalition, and whether you have machinery to push on the narrative becomes much, much important. Let me finally conclude in a couple of minutes, which is, what does all of this mean for emerging national politics? First, as I said in the beginning, it won't make any difference to 2024. Of course, like, you know, in those who will win, it will lead to some sort of morale booster for that party. Those who would lose will be sad for some day. But BJP is a front runner in 2024. There's no doubt about it. Like, they are going to play the final no matter what happens in all 5 states, including UP. What this elections or upcoming elections are about, who is going to play against BJP in the finals? And if you think about it, what's happening, there is a new great game happening among political parties of India. Basically, 3 players, the Congress, the AAP, and the TMC, are going to compete to emerge for the second spot. So now both parties, AAP and Trinamool Congress, are moving out of their territories and trying to acquire new bases. So AAP is basically is a formidable player in Punjab, may emerge as the single largest party. We don't know. But as Sanjay ji also pointed out, AAP will be basically will make its presence felt in Goa as well as in Uttarakhand. They may not cross 10% vote share mark, but even that many votes is going to, change. Given they are small assemblies, it will change who might be the single largest party. Similarly, TMC, while it made a lot of noise in 2-3 months back by poaching leaders from the Congress in Goa, seems to have fizzled out in Goa. But for them, the elections, like the new territories of expansion, are coming up next year, when Tripura will poll, when Mizoram and Meghalaya will poll. So both these parties, AAP and TMC, are basically looking at Congress with cannibalizing eyes. What they want to do is emerge. It's difficult. Congress, even at the best, worst performance, still won 50 odd seats and has 20% vote. Even if, say, for hypothetical scenario, AAP does well in Delhi, Punjab, and Goa, and any other state, the maximum number of seats they are going to win is 25 to 30. Even if Mamta sweeps West Bengal and wins those northeastern states, the maximum number of seats she is going to win is 50, right? So they will be below, in actual strength, below Congress, but elections are not always about actual numbers. And this is where I want to, again, switch back to UP. It doesn't matter if BJP wins by 210 or 220 seats. Once the elections are over, there are only winners and losers. It is for analysts like me, Sanjay ji, Sudha Pai, to analyze how much one win or how much one lost. It's basically, after a week, all will remember the winner and everyone will forget who lost. So elections are also about perceptions. Now, this battle between AAP, TMC, and Congress will create a perception that the second spot is open for competition. And when the second spot becomes open for competition, then all kinds of players who will mobilize resources, say campaign managers, money bags who will be putting money in campaigns, or voters, everyone will be basically become uncertain. In short run, this will help the BJP's national expansion plan, because what it will do, it will increase the electoral distance between the first party and whoever the second party is going to be. But in the medium and long term, we don't know what the implications of this emerging structure of competition will be. So I'll stop here and happy to join the conversation.
Thank you, Rahul, for a stimulating presentation. Now, we turn to the discussion section. We already have a few questions coming in, but maybe I just use the moderator's prerogative to pose a couple of questions before I turn to the audience. One of the things I mentioned right at the beginning was, and it's of course the defining sort of theme of our present day existence, COVID-19 and the pandemic. May I pose this question, and how do you see the impact of COVID-19 on the elections? And let's say if we turn to particularly Uttar Pradesh, where I've been, of course, I've been in Singapore. Unfortunately, I've been unable to go to India to watch the campaign. I saw the Prime Minister, I think on multiple occasions, has touted UP as a sort of model for the pandemic governance on how it tackled COVID. So, how would you say the COVID issue impacting the election? May I maybe first turn to Professor Kumar, since he's been traveling for the last few days on the ground.
Ronanjay, the very fact that none of the speakers spoke about COVID issue in this election, that should give you an answer to this. That should give answer to your question. This is not at all an issue on the ground. Nobody is talking about COVID, neither political parties nor the voters of the states. So I think COVID is not at all an issue in these elections.
Right, that's interesting, given the sort of enormous number of deaths, etc., that it caused. I think Professor Pai has a point to make. Yeah, please. I think you need to unmute, Professor Pai. Yes, please.
I just wanted to say that the second wave did affect UP very badly. And at that point of time, people were very unhappy. And if, for example, these elections had been held last year, soon afterwards, things would have been different. But public memory is short. Secondly, I think there was an attempt by the Adityanath government to quickly cover up the damage. And a lot of people were posted to UP by the center who did take over COVID management. And by about June, July, things had improved a great deal in UP. That is there. So I think public memory is short, and also the praise that was heaped on Adityanath by the Prime Minister and others of being extremely capable. Somehow rhetoric seems to help. I mean, one may find it surprising, but that seems to help. And I think the COVID issue in that way has been buried. I would agree with Sanjay that it's no longer important, but there was a point of time when it caused tremendous unhappiness and people thought it was going to be a huge issue, but not in this election. I think unemployment and inflation, if you were to take economic issues or any kind of distress, are today far more important. If you look at the agitation against the railway examinations, or if you look at people talking about how they cannot afford things and the smaller MSMEs and so on, those I think are more important issues which are resurfaced once the COVID lockdown is over. People have sort of put it behind and moved on, and now they have to deal with their daily lives.
Right, thank you. And may I quickly turn to the other issue, which has also sort of occupied many of us over the last few months, the farmers' agitation and, of course, a rollback by the government. Could I also, ask the speakers, maybe, Professor Gurharpal Singh, would you like to sort of dwell a little bit more? I know you mentioned it in your presentation. How will the farmers' protests, how do you see it impacting the politics and the outcome of the Punjab?
Well, in a normal circumstance, you would see, this would have been the ideal thing for the Akali Dal to articulate. But the Akali Dal found itself on the wrong side of the political game in being aligned with the BJP, and only disassociating from the BJP once the BJP decided that it was going to pass the laws. Now, what has happened is that with the agitation in itself has not created, has not been translated into politically because of the nature of the political competition and the institutions that exist. So you have the organized political parties, the Shromni Akali Dal Congress, ANAP, and the farmers' unions, who themselves have decided to enter the electoral competition. And I think they will cut into the farming vote if that competition can persist. And there's also been tension between the farmers' unions and UP, that the two are competing for the same vote, and it will drastically reduce chances of UP returning some more MLAs. But the key critical player, I think, is the Shromni Akali Dal and its relationship with the farmers, the farming community, and I think that is. The Akali Dal has not benefited from the farmers' agitation. To some extent, Congress has gained a measure of support by, especially under Captain Amrinder Singh, when it lent support for the farmers. But that again has been somewhat muted because of change of leadership. So a bit like the pandemic, it's difficult to figure out who are going to be the beneficiaries of farmers' agitation. We know who are going to be the losers. The BJP is on the back foot. It is very difficult for the BJP, I think, to improve on its 2017 performance. It may get an additional seat or two with its allies, but overall, I think the farmers' agitation is not translated or will not translate into electoral votes.
Right. And any thoughts by any of the other panelists on the impact on in UP, particularly Western UP, which was also a site for, okay, Professor Pai, please.
Well, BJP has had a bad hit due to the farmers' agitation. Because the farmers still remember all the names they were called, you know, Andolanjini and Khalistani and so on and so forth. But, and it has had an impact on Western UP, which is why the SP has joined hands with the RLD. See, SP is largely a Yadav party, and it has joined hands with the RLD because the RLD has a base among the Jats, you know, coming down from Charan Singh and Jayant Chaudhary being there. So the point is, will this coalition benefit by it? But having said that, they might benefit a little bit, but BJP has other strong points in Western UP. As I said, it has. It also has the the Hindu vote amongst the upper castes and so on. So once again, it may not help the SPRLD, and yet might subtract some seats from the BJP. The other thing is that there is the whole sugarcane dues issue in Western UP. I thought that last minute they would pay the farmers and they would be able to make them happy with the sugarcane issue, but they haven't done it. So that is another issue that is extremely important apart from the protest, and it was part of the protest as well. So since they have not done it, that issue might. But as I said earlier, farmers are extremely unreliable in this. They voted for the BJP even when there was great agrarian distress. So ultimately, the votes will get divided between the SPRLD and the BJP. Perhaps the BJP will get more because they have, as I said, the urban vote, and because they will be able to get the smaller subcastes, the backwards and the Dalits onto their side, who are not really being part of the farm protests.
Right. So let me just quickly turn to some of the questions that are coming from the audience. Let me just combine two questions, and maybe already able to see it on chat. One question is on the role of the youth, or the demographic, the vote by the so-called youth vote, what role that will play. And a second sort of related one is the women vote, and how important will they be in the elections, these elections, particularly in UP. I know, Professor Kumar, you've written about some of these issues. Do you want to take a quick stab at this?
I think there have been a lot of talk about the women vote, especially after Congress leader Priyanka Gandhi made an announcement of giving 40% tickets. But I don't, some initial response by political parties, because they thought that this is one big constituency which they should try to mobilize. But I think looking at the effect, that impact of that appeal on the ground, that it was not making any appeal on the ground. So this is not an issue on which political parties are trying to mobilize the voters, the women vote. Yes, women turnout, as if we go by the past trend, the turnout may be higher compared to past election, as has been the trend in the past election. But I don't see women vote going decisively in favor of one party or the other, like we have seen happening in, say, some other states, West Bengal, Bihar, or at one point of time it used to be in Tamil Nadu as well, when Jayalalitha used to be there as the chief minister. So women vote is going to be as divided as men vote. So I don't see any significant trend in with regard to the women vote. Same with the youth as well, except for, I think if we look at the Jat vote, the younger Jat are more inclined in favor of Jayant Chaudhary compared to the elderly Jat. So that's the only significant thing I noticed traveling in Western UP with regard to the youth and the women. I don't see them as playing very, very crucial role or an important role in these elections.
Right. Rahul, since you're the youngest panelist, do you want to say something about the youth vote? And is too much made of the youth vote? Do they vote differently from the older demographics? Rahul, you need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Ranjoy. yes, at least the research so far has suggested that youth is not a separate constituency in India. They like they have very similar sort of perceptions about different parties, and they are voting on similar cleavages. Of course, in like last few years, what we have seen that Prime Minister Modi has a very different kind of or slightly higher appeal among young voters, and he has also managed to bridge the gender disadvantage which BJP used to lag among women voters. But these are very sort of like minor developments. One cannot make this argument that youth or women are voting decisively in favor or against any party, and especially this phenomena has yet not emerged in UP. Second point I wanted to make on the discussion we were having on COVID and farmers and economic concerns. See, in my opinion, most of these issues, especially economic issues, are always present in all elections. If you ever travel to any state in India, people will talk about unemployment, people will talk about corruption, people will talk about inflation, right? So issues are always present. It is the job of political parties to basically articulate those issues into a message and then differentiate themselves that they haven't done well, but we will be able to do well. And the same thing happened on COVID, right? So yes, and Professor Pai is absolutely right. Like there was a big political opening of after second wave, and opposition could have done something about it. But because they were not seen present among voters, trying to help them any more than the BJP or RSS workers, in 6 months, this issue fizzled out. And people started saying, this is an act of natural disaster, so it is an act of God. And PM tried to do some things he failed, but I don't think anyone would have done better than the current regime, right? And that's how issues die. Similarly, on the farmers front, right? I don't think it's going to give any decisive advantage to any political party, as Professor Gurarpal also pointed out. So, presence of an issue does not basically bring votes for any political party. Those issues have to be articulated into a message, which is what in some places opposition parties have not been able to do very effectively.
Right. So we have a couple of more questions we have maybe around 10 minutes or so. The first is, of course, that old chestnut, the role of caste and this is in particular in relation to UP, and does it trump economic issues or as well as communal or religious?
Can I take this question, because I have a particular liking and disliking for this question. The reason why I dislike this question is that social identities are present in elections across the globe. So it's not UP where caste matters. Race matters in United States. African Americans are more likely to vote for Democrat. White suburban voters are more likely to vote for Republican. And this is happening for hundreds of years, despite whatever level of development you want to think about United States. So it's not that in backward areas or poor areas, identity issues have a very different play out. It happens in everywhere. The reason identities are aligned, political parties are rooted in social cleavages, or there is an alignment of caste with political parties. It's not that I'm born to a certain caste and that's why I like a political party. I like that political parties where, because there is some sort of policy formulation, there is some sort of policy concerns that parties espouse. So there is an alignment between Dalits and BSP, or Yadavs and SP, or upper caste and BJP, because those parties play out the concerns of these communities. So it's a policy connection. It's not an identity connection. Very much like it happens in UK or it happens in United States. I don't know any democracy on this planet where identities are not aligned with political parties.
Right. Does anyone else want to add to that question on caste and politics?
Yeah, please. I would echo that in a sense that there's commentators are reading Punjab through caste, whereas actually the influence of caste, I think, is much less important than is being suggested. And there's quite a lot of fluidity, and caste behavior is very different from caste identity in everyday life, as well as organized politics. So I would very much echo Rahul's point, and I think this is where the Congress might come stuck, is that it is banking itself on Channi consolidating the scheduled caste vote, and this may or may not happen, because the scheduled caste vote and the OBC vote in Punjab is as divided as the other vote. So although they have tended to vote in the past in larger numbers for the Congress and the non-Congress parties, the equation could change quite dramatically if the BSP and the Akali Dal are deemed to be more popular.
Right, we have 5 minutes or so left, and there's a question that's directly addressed to Professor Pai and Rahul. It's on the perception of whether law and order has improved in UP, and your thoughts on that. And maybe I can just tag another sort of quick question onto that. I think Professor Pai in particular talked about the image of Adityanath. You talked about, on one hand, on all indicators, UP government not doing too well, but then you have the sort of BJP machinery saying that UP and Adityanath has done a wonderful job, and I also sort of wanted to push you on something that you said on the place of Adityanath in the BJP system or hierarchy. I think you mentioned that Modi and Adityanath might be in the opposite camp. So in short, what do you see as a future of Adityanath? Is it seen as a threat to Modi or as a drag to Modi? How do you sort of, what's the place of Adityanath in the BJP structure?
So, can I answer that?
Yeah, sure.
I think to understand this, one needs to go back to 2017 and how Adityanath became the chief minister. I think Adityanath was a surprise candidate. Names of Keshav Maurya and Manoj Sinha and all were floating much before that. I think Adityanath was selected by Modi, and the RSS agreed because they wanted to create a hardline leader and to bring in hardline Hindutva, because the perception is that UP is a state where this works. Let's say in comparison to places like the South and so on. So he was made the chief minister. He was not the first choice. He is secondly also not somebody who's part of the RSS. That is, he has not come through the RSS. And I think there is another aspect of him, that he had built up from the late 90s, early 2000s, a certain position for himself from Bharatiya, that entire Tarai, Purvanchal area, through his Hindu Yuva Vahini and so on, and had become extremely powerful in that area with a very Robin Hood image that he could settle things, and people used to come to him for various things. So he has a power structure of his own. He is not easy to dislodge, in the sense that, look at Uttarakhand, 3 chief ministers could be changed. You look at Assam, a chief minister could be changed. But when they tried in 2000, in the middle of 2021, they could not change him, and eventually the RSS, in fact, was Mohan Bhagwat who came out, I think, in support of him, if we are reading between the lines correctly, and he has remained. There was an effort then made to show that he and Modi are very close to each other, because Modi tried to send one of his key bureaucrats there, and also there is a certain difference between the two of them. Whether Modi thinks that he didn't handle COVID well, or he didn't handle, as was being said, law and order, and had gone too far in some things like the use of the police and so on, there are differences between them. And therefore, if they do very well and Adityanath comes back again, he will become much stronger in UP this time. And so therefore, that's why I made the statement that in 2020, that Modi might find this a little difficult. Look at those photographs that came in the paper of him putting an arm around Adityanath and walking down and so on. These are all photo ops to show, to paper over the cracks. There are immense cracks within the BJP unit. So I think that is where Adityanath is. He is a man who is extremely strong and has a base in Gorakhpur in the Mutt and among the Thakurs of that region and also amongst the lower castes. Then I think you wanted to know about law and order. I don't know if I've answered your question.
Sure. Yeah. Rahul, do you want to sort of quickly interject on both Adityanath?
Yes. Yeah.
I also wanted to say something on law and order.
Yeah, please. I'll come to Sanjay after. Yeah.
No, yeah.
I'll quickly basically make my points. I think I agree with Professor Pai's characterization about the choice in 2017. But where I would differ with her is that I don't think there is a conflict between Modi and Adityanath and Modi and Adityanath in opposing camp. Modi is in a different league among BJP leaders now. Any camp that begins after Modi. There is no competition with Modi in BJP at the moment, the kind of stature he has acquired for himself within the BJP. So you can think of a competition between Adityanath versus versus Amit Shah versus other leaders, but Modi is not in competition with Amit Shah. That's my reading of things. On the law and order, and quickly I'll finish it here, which is, and this is where perception, statistics, and communities all come together. So if you look at the data, there is no improvement in law and order. But like people don't read data while going to vote. It's all about perceptions that are being created. And in perception, Yogi Adityanath has enough symbols to display that he has improved law and order, right? So you may disagree that this is basically extrajudicial killings of people who were arrested. But for his strongman image, it plays, right? That no matter who the gunda is, whether it's a Brahmin or a Muslim or anyone, we will catch them, we will put them behind bars, and we will basically do all sorts of things. So it plays to that perception, and I think on that perception, there is a strength. And last point, which is, this is how, like, perception and data and where you come from differs. So if you are a Muslim, you would be looking at this perception very differently. If you are a Dalit, you would be looking this differently. If you are a urban, you are a woman. And that's why it's not like, in black and white and in binaries. I'll stop here.
Right. We've really run out of time, but some final words of wisdom from Professor Kumar before we conclude.
No, I would just endorse what Rahul has said. Couple of points quickly. One, I think gone are the days when we should read too much about photographs. Like, Modi putting hands on the shoulder of Adityanath, trying to display this, trying to display that. I think at least I have stopped doing that, looking at these events and figuring out what is happening within the BJP. I do agree that there is no fight at all, nothing of that kind. Second, law and order. I think there are two different views, two different angles of how do we look at the law and order problem. And I think I have been saying this for a very long time now. If we look at from our perspective and we think and we say that law and order has deteriorated because there are extrajudicial killing in UP, and this is not the way law and order should be handled. But if you go by common people's perception, view, they fully endorse that. They are extremely happy. I think one thing which is cutting across entire UP is, and on which BJP is hoping to gain, or BJP is hoping to just retain some of its support base, which it might lose, is law and order. General perception among the people is that law and order has improved, whatever may be the situation with regard to unemployment or price rise, etc. But there is a general improvement in law and order. In a sense, improvement in a sense, you are safe in your day-to-day life. And this is what will help BJP in retaining, as I see, that they will lose some seat, but still front runner in this electoral race.
Thank you. I think we could have gone on, but unfortunately, we'll have to call it a day here. Thank you to all four presenters for their excellent analysis and for the audience for listening in and for their questions. May I turn over the floor now to Kunthavi to conclude today's discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Hanajoy. On behalf of ICES, we'd like to extend our thanks to the panelists and moderator for an engaging and insightful discussion. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you at our upcoming events. Thank you.
Thank you.